live from Whitney Media, 1460 WVOX, the Greenburgh Report with Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner. You can join in the conversation at 914-636-0110. Now on 1460 WVOX, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Good morning. I'm Paul Feiner. I'm the Greenburgh Town Supervisor. And the good news is we won't talk politics today. We're going to talk about birding with a student, Julien Amsellem, and she is going to talk to us about her passion. Birding is a passion, and it's also an effort to help watch the effects of climate change occur day to day. So, Julien, thank you so much for joining us, and maybe you could start by telling us a little bit about yourself, what school you go to, what grade you're in, and what got you interested in birding.
Hi, Paul. How are you? Well, I am Julien Amsellem, and I am going into 10th grade. And I go to school in Hastings on Hudson, New York, in Hastings High School. And I love all aspects of school, and I really do love birding. That's why we're talking here today. And what really got me interested in birding was when I was about 6 years old. I saw this bird called a pileated woodpecker, which is the largest woodpecker in North America, right outside my house, pecking on a tree that was just across the street. And I was just so blown away by it. Just really sparked this interest in birding that still lasts today.
Julien, when you got involved in birding, do you do it do you look at birds by yourself, or is there a committee of other students that join with you?
I generally go birding by myself. I don't know many other students who are birders. I know that across the country, birding has become increasingly popular among young teens and people in their 20s and 30s. But around here, I haven't found that many birders that are my age. So I generally bird in solitude. But whenever I'm in places where there are other birders, I always tend to gravitate towards them and talk with them and bird with them while I'm there.
I do a lot of bicycling, and I've noticed that there's a lot more colorful birds that I've seen, or maybe I'm just being a little bit more, just noticing it a little bit more. Are there different birds now that people haven't seen in this area, a couple of years ago?
Well, I think most of the birds that are in this area are still the same birds that are around. But after coronavirus or during coronavirus, we really did see many less cars on the road. Many less people were out and about and doing activities more in the great outdoors rather than driving their cars or going to work. And so birds don't like to compete with loud sounds, especially in migration or during breeding season, so they can better attract mates and set up territories. And so because of all this quieting down in the environment, birds were tend to came out more this spring that I've seen than in past springs. So that could really be a big reason as to why you saw more birds, especially the colorful ones, like your warbler species that migrate through. A few stay to breed, but they all migrate through starting in May and then coming back in about August and September. And you'll see more of those if there isn't as much mechanical activity, such as with cars or large factories. And so that could really explain why people have been seeing more birds recently.
Right. What do you remember the first day that you got interested in birding?
I don't remember.
How did your interest evolve?
I don't remember it in depth, but I do remember I was just standing outside, in front of my house, and this massive bird came and landed on this tree, and I was just absolutely blown away. I was like, "What is that?" I thought it was like a crow, but it was moving like a woodpecker. And so I had the small field guide at the time, nothing much, and I looked through it, and I was like, "Wow, this is a bird called a pileated woodpecker," which we do see in the area a lot. And you have to be in the right habitat, which is like mature deciduous forest. But when you're there, you can see them, and because they're just absolutely tremendous, and then you can hear them a lot because they have this really loud call that echoes throughout the entire forest. And then from there, after I saw the pileated woodpecker, I was so amazed by the diversity of species of birds. I mean, there are well over 10,000 species of birds in the world. And then they're just, as this group of animals, their innate ability to perform almost all activities like flying, swimming, climbing, running. I mean, they've mastered almost every sort of activity they can. And so this really
we have to take a first break, but we'll be right back with Julien Amsellem. And Julien will tell us about birding right after this break. It's about 5 minutes. I'm so excited. I think you're getting me interested in this whole field. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be right back.
Big shots more than a little uncomfortable by spouting off on WVOX right here at 1460.
Now back to the Greenburgh Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Good morning. My name is Paul Feiner, and my guest is Julien Amsellem, and we're talking about birding. And for Julien, birding is a passion. It gives Julien an opportunity to appreciate the effects of climate change that occurs day to day. Are you, there's a Woods Committee. Could you tell us?
Sorry, Paul, I think you just cut out there for a second. Could you repeat that, please?
Could you tell us about the Save the Woods Committee?
Oh, of course. So the Save Our Woods Committee is a committee in Hastings on Hudson to protect the hillside woods, which is a natural deciduous forest that takes up a decent portion of Hastings. And the woods has really been ravaged by two main things, which are invasive species of trees, mainly the empress tree, also known as Ailanthus, and the empress tree, also known as the Paulownia tree, and more specifically the Norway maple, which is really the worst of the two invasive trees that are bad for our woods. And then deer, the exploding population of white-tailed deer in the hillside woods. And so I'll start with the invasive trees. The Norway maples are a real problem for the woods because they shade out the bottom of the forest floor, and it doesn't allow for native trees such as oak and native maples such as sugar maples to grow because there's no sunlight penetration to the understory. And then worse off, since the deer don't eat Norway maple, they then target the native trees, which are already having enough trouble growing, and that makes it even harder and harder for those native trees to sprout and form into the larger secondary and tertiary growth that we need to sustain a forest. And when you have this lack of natural growth in the forest, you lose many of your important species like natural bird species, native insect species, and so the careful equilibrium that the forest should be in is completely thrown off. And then the deer, as I just mentioned, make that worse by eating the few saplings that the native trees try to take root. Any of those native saplings, such as your beech or your birch or your oaks or your native maples, none of them can take root and can't grow to become mature trees because the deer will target them immediately. And so what our project is trying to do, the Save Our Woods project and committee, is trying to cut down most of the invasive Norway maple, tree of heaven, which is Ailanthus, and Paulownia trees, which are the empress trees, and then try to fence off certain portions of the woods so the deer can't go in. And these two separate actions will hopefully allow for new tree growth, especially native tree growth, to increase and bring the woods back to as normal as it could be. And so that's what we're trying to do in our committee.
That is great. Do you have any aspirations to science or work, say, for an environmental organization when you graduate school? Is this what you think your passion in life's going to be?
I really don't know. I'm really passionate about a lot of things. So this summer I took a Columbia University course on conservation biology and sustainability. And so that pathway of going down there seems so fun. But I'm also very interested in the law, and I really love politics. And I love different aspects of science as well, like ecology. So I really don't know where I'm going to go. I mean, I just have so many broad interests, and I don't know which one I'm going to focus on, or if I'm maybe going to do more than one.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I used to live in Hastings, and I tell people that I think Hastings has had more Nobel Prize winners than any place in the world. So for some reason, Hastings has outstanding, people. My first campaign manager now, Phil Weiser, lived in Hastings and now is Attorney General in Colorado. And it sounds like you have a really brilliant future ahead of you. Getting back to birding, what's the difference between birding and bird watching?
So, I mean, birding and bird watching are essentially the exact same thing. People use the terms, they'll change them whenever they feel like it. They're the exact same thing. In truth, when you meet birders and bird watchers, what I've tend to find is that your more experienced bird watchers or your birders who've been doing this for decades and decades and decades, they'll say they're birding and they'll call themselves birders, as opposed to when someone just is recently picking up a new pair of binoculars, learning the ropes of the activity, they'll say they're going bird watching, or they'll call themselves a bird watcher. So that's what I've tend to found over the years. But both terms can be exchanged in and out, and it's not a big difference.
And you were talking about binoculars. Are there special binoculars that you recommend for people who love birding or bird watching? And binoculars they're a really crucial part of birding, because unless you're an extremely experienced bird watcher who can identify all the birds based on their song and call, or you can just identify them by their shape or certain attributes, you really do need binoculars to get that close-up visual on the bird and see the plumage and see all the different specifics of the bird so you can identify it. And I would say that the most experienced bird watchers, they tend to gravitate towards the Swarovski EL 8.5 by 42 binoculars, and that 8.5 is the magnification, and then the 42 is your optical diameter. But for most people who are starting, and for most people in general, those are way out of most people's budget, because they're about $2,500, which is really expensive. For someone who's starting up bird watching who has a low budget, they have binoculars that are as low as $30, but a good pair of binoculars that isn't too out of range would be about $150 to $200, and you can get Vortex Crossfire or Vortex Diamondback binoculars, which are both really good choices for someone who's starting birding. That's interesting. Are there you live near the Hudson River? I live closer to Ardsley. Then you have other parts of the county that are more rural. I was going to ask, are birds different in different areas? But I think we have to take a break, so maybe we could start with that right after this brief break. Is that okay?
Okay, of course.
Okay, great. Thanks.
WVOX. Now back to the Greenburgh Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
This is Paul Feiner. I'm the Greenburgh town supervisor, and my guest is an amazing Hastings high school student, Julien Amsellem, who is involved in birding and other environmental initiatives. And right before the break, I asked Julien if Julien could tell us if there's any difference in the types of birds you would see, say, near the Hudson River or in the urban areas in Westchester County or Central County. I'm just curious.
So, I mean, it really does depend on the environment that you're in. So, like, the birds that you're going to see in the Hudson River are going to be different than your birds towards the central part of the county, near, like say, Cranberry Lake Preserve, or in the northern part, like Teatown Lake Reservation. Areas like in places like that, you're going to find more of your like your deciduous birds that love like dense deciduous forests. So, like in migration, there you're going to find your warblers. Then throughout the rest of the year, you're going to see your nuthatches, chickadees, woodpeckers, blue jays, cardinals. Your typical birds throughout the year, you're going to get vireos here and there, depending on like where you are and if they like that's the proper habitat. Like if it's near riparian, meaning like wetland areas. And then when you're closer to the river, you're going to see birds more like your Canada geese, your ducks. In the winter, you might see scotters. You might see mergansers, which are both types of ducks. Pintails, which is another species of duck. You'll see tons of gulls. If you're up near Croton Point Park, you might see some terns. You'll see sandpipers, which are small birds that probe the sandy and mud flats for food. You might see some plovers if you're lucky along the Hudson, though it's a little rarer. And then if you go over towards the part of the county that is closer to the Sound, near like Marshlands Conservancy and Edith G. Reed Preserve in Rye, you're going to find a whole different array of birds. You're going to continually find those deciduous birds like your warblers, vireos, nuthatches. But then you're also going to find birds that like tend to live near marshes. Like you'll find Nelson's sparrow during migration. You'll see yellow leg species, which are types of the large sandpipers. You'll see tons of wading birds like ducks. You'll see lots of herons and egrets, especially snowy egrets, which you don't find as much along the Hudson. So, I mean, wherever you go in the county, you're going to find a vast array of different species. Even if you go up towards Croton Point Park, ever since they put a cap on the landfill and they planted native grasses, they've had this explosion in a rare species called the grasshopper sparrow, and now a near-threatened species, which is the bobolink, which is really facing endangerment from climate change since they're very sensitive to an increase in temperature. So wherever you go in the county, you're going to find so many different types of birds. I know the county has reported at least 340 different types of birds, which in New York State ranks as the 9th best county.
I had is the birds, where do they fly in the winter to, and do they always sort of like pick the same, I don't know if you'd be able to answer it, do they typically pick the exact same location? So if a bird, say, is in the Hudson and then it gets cold and they're going to Florida or whatever, will that bird typically come back, in the spring?
So when they leave in winter, I'll start with the first part of the question. Many of the birds will fly towards South America. That's where like all your warblers that come up and breed in northern New York or some in Westchester, or even across the Northeast. Most of them will fly down to either Central America or to South America, like Brazil, Argentina, Ecuador, Colombia, countries like those, where they will spend the entire winter. Many species of birds do that, like our flycatchers, some of our sparrows, almost all of our warblers. And then a lot of then there are birds that do come up during winter. So like birds like dark-eyed juncos or birds like white-throated sparrows, they come from like their breeding grounds up in northern Canada, and they'll come down in the winter. Then they come to where we are, so like in southern New York, and that's where they'll winter down here. And then in terms of like ducks, many ducks, mostly your wintering ducks, as I mentioned, like pintails, teals, mergansers, scotters. Once again, they breed up towards near Arctic areas in northern Canada, places such as those, and then they'll come down and then they'll winter on our open bodies of water that haven't frozen over. And then as to whether the birds come back to the same place, they have shown that birds do like returning to the same area if they know it's profitable for food or good for nesting, low on predators. But personally, I don't know of any, I have not been able to, prove that a bird that I've seen in a year before has come back to the exact same spot. But they have shown that birds do tend to like areas they've already been to.
Do you know how long it takes them to fly to Central America?
I don't know the exact time it takes. Timing on that,
do you know, how many miles they could fly a day?
I know some birds fly well over 2,000 miles to get to their wintering grounds. Certain birds like godwits, the Hudsonian godwit, I believe it has one of the longest migrations. It's close to about 8,000 or 9,000 miles. And many of these birds also do continuous migrations, which means they don't stop. Many birds will stop at various places as they migrate down. Some birds will just continuously fly until they reach their destination, which is very impressive for birds since they're so small and their energy reserves are so low because they can't fill up that much. But birds make extreme migrations. Birds like the Canada warbler, which is a bird that breeds just north of Westchester. You'll see them here all over in migration, but you won't see them breeding here. They, I believe, make a continuous migration from our area down towards Central and South America.
Where did you get all this knowledge from, then? Are there, books or videos that help educate you about birding?
So I started, reading a lot about birds from field guides, and so I just slowly amassed this knowledge about birds over the years from reading various field guides. Mainly Peterson, Roger Tory Peterson has an amazing set of field guides, as well as David Allen Sibley has an amazing set of field guides. They're probably the most known for their books about birds and about bird identification. And then I really loved, when I was younger, this book by two people named Sterry and Small, which is a photographic field guide, which I still use all the time today. And then as I've gotten older and I've used the internet more, I've read up a lot about birds on sites like Merlin Bird ID, which is an app that Cornell and Audubon created so people could identify birds out in the field, and they give you tips about identification. And then they also have a site called All About Birds where they give extreme amounts of in-depth information about all the birds. And so just from reading these sites over and over again and seeing these birds and then wanting to know more about them, I've learned about them. And then just being out in the field and watching them, watching their behavior has allowed me to learn more about them. So it's just this cumulative experience that's allowed me to get all this knowledge about birds.
Are any members of your family also interested in birding?
My grandfather is quite interested in birding. He doesn't go out birding as much, and he's gotten to birding much later in life, closer to his 70s. But he does love watching birds at his feeder, and whenever he can go out, he loves going down where he lives near the Merrimack River in Massachusetts. He loves birding the shore or trying to find raptors or eagles. His favorite bird, coincidentally, actually, is also the pileated woodpecker. And he doesn't see them up where he lives as much. Up in Essex County, Massachusetts, they're not found as much. But he's always a little jealous when I see them with as much frequency as I do down here.
So do you take videos or pictures and then send it to your grandfather?
I sometimes do take videos and pictures and send them to my grandfather. I rarely take videos, but I do a lot of photography. I use this site called eBird, which is a citizen science site created by Cornell and Audubon. Again, it was created in accordance with Merlin, and it's where people all over the world can put in their sightings that they see, and so you get all this global data on birds, and year after year they can analyze this data and use it to study the birds and see trends in their population or what they're eating or various other scientific information needed about birds. And so when you post to eBird, you can add photos, especially if you see something rare or uncommon. And so I put a lot of my photos on there, and so he can go online and see them, and he likes to do that.
Have you ever have you been interested in the Greenburgh Nature Center, or have you worked with any of the local environmental groups?
So when I was younger, I used to go to the Greenburgh Nature Center all the time, and I loved always looking at the raptors that are outside. And I mean, that was one of my favorite places to go. And then I haven't gone there that much as I've gotten older. But last summer, I did work with the Lenoir Nature Preserve, which is in Yonkers, and they're an Audubon chapter, the Hudson River Audubon Society, and they had a camp there, and I helped work with them. And then I'm also becoming a member of both the Hudson River Audubon Society and the Sawmill River Audubon Society.
That is great. We're going to be right back after this brief break, and I'm interviewing Julien Amsellem, who is an amazing student who is telling us about birding. I'm getting so interested in this topic thanks to this interview.
Now, back to the Greenburgh Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Good morning. And my guest is Julien Amsellem, and we're talking about birding and Julien's and birding. Where, Julien, do you watch birds? Do you focus mainly on your backyard or at parks? Do you travel all over the area?
Well, I particularly love to bird in Westchester, which is a broad area, so I'll focus in on some of the more specific areas. But of the New York County, since I live in Westchester, it's the easiest for me to bird in. And because I've seen now a good amount of birds in Westchester, I've decided that I'd really love to continue birding as much as I can in Westchester. My main spots for birding are probably the hillside woods, which I already mentioned we're helping with, which I'm doing invasive tree work and white-tailed deer work in right now. But I love birding in there. There are two small ponds, one called Sugar Pond and one called Vernal Pond, and they're both great for seeing various heron species and kingfisher species. And also during spring, the warblers love to go near the pond because they love areas with water because that attracts insects. And then I also love birding right in my backyard all the time, right where I live in Hastings. I have this about 300-year-old white oak that grows right through my deck. And so that it's literally a birder's paradise for me because my deck goes right out into the canopy of this tree, and the birds are literally 5 feet above my head, and you see these amazing spring migrants come through, and the warblers, which I've mentioned many, many times, and because they're just so amazingly beautiful, they have this strong preference for oaks because the oaks create lots of pollen, which in turn attracts insects, and warblers eat insects. So they really are attracted to these oaks, and so I just see this amazing diversity of warblers come through this tree that grows in my deck every year, and so it's just so fun. And then every winter, of course, I always have my bird feeders out to see what fun wintering birds are in the area, which are generally like your chickadees, nuthatches, woodpeckers, sparrows, juncos, as I already mentioned. And then I also live in the Landing in Dobbs Ferry, and I love birding in the Landing because it's right next to Wickers Creek. It's right next to the Old Croton Aqueduct, and it's right along the Hudson. So you get once again this really amazing, diverse group of birds. You can see shorebirds and wading ducks and herons and egrets and warblers and vireos and sparrows. And so I haven't the total of birds I've seen in the Landing isn't yet as large as my Hillside Woods list, but I do predict that in time it will become a lot larger due to its proximity to the Hudson and it's just great variety of habitats that it has right next to it.
You know, I was sort of thinking as we were talking right now, there's so many people who feel bored because of the pandemic and they can't have entertainment, you know, go to shows or concerts or movies. People are staying at home. So birding is really a great answer to what people could do during COVID-19. It's a way to be fascinated by nature, to do something that's interesting and fun, and to be safe.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely just one of those activities that never gets old. Like, you can go out birding, and the amazing thing is there's always something new. So, like, if you're, like, interested in mammals, for example, around here, you'll see squirrels, you'll see rabbits, groundhogs, raccoons, deer, the occasional coyote. And, I mean, we recently had a bear in Hastings, which, if you're a mammal lover, was, like, amazing, but it's just such a rare occurrence. And mammals, you really just don't have this diversity in our area that you can see. But with birds, because they can fly and because they can be swept off course by storms, there's always something new and interesting. And so there's never not a reason to go outside and look for birds. And because birds are also seasonal and you see different birds each season, it's always fun, like, to find your first bird of the season or to see birds that came through and then they left and came back. Like this morning, I went out birding before our interview, and back in May, I had seen a bird called a blue-gray gnatcatcher and another bird called the blue-winged warbler. And then they both went up to their breeding territories, and I hadn't seen any since about early to mid-May. And then this morning, I was out walking through the landing, and I spotted both a blue-winged warbler and the blue-gray gnatcatcher again. And it was just one of those, like, oh, great, it's amazing, like, one of those aha moments. We're back again for fall migration. And so it's never a dull moment when you're birding.
Right. You should, you know, I'm saying to myself, you know, if I was like part of the you know, the Bronx Zoo or the Bronx Botanical Gardens, you know, I would want to hire you like in a second. You know, you know, I think you said you're starting 10th grade. And, you know, I think that the one thing that I'm, like, certain is you never going to have a problem getting it, you know, within a top, so, you know, organization, because it's, you really are making this topic also very, very, interesting. So the Audubon Society, have you been involved with them much? I
haven't been involved with them as much as I'd like to be. I'm very, very soon I'm going to apply for a membership with both of my local Audubon chapters, and then for the New York State Young Birders Association, which is a group of young people who go out birding with each other to various places with just so to share their interest. And I was going to apply for them a lot earlier in the year, but then coronavirus struck, and I didn't really see a large point in it because I knew they weren't going to be doing anything. But now that I think it's important for me to get it done anyway, so I'm going to get that done really soon. But I have birded with my local Hudson River Audubon Society. I've participated in their feeder watches and done a lot of work with them, but I am not a member quite yet.
And birding, it's not really a very expensive activity, right?
It's not. I mean, really, you can, if you really want to, you can bird absolutely for free. You can go onto the App Store and you can you can download the app Merlin Bird ID for free. And then, I mean, it's helpful to have binoculars, but they're not a necessity. They're extremely helpful, and you can get a really cheap pair of binoculars that can do the trick for someone who's just starting birding, and then upgrade your gear as you go if you really enjoy it. But it's in the beginning, it can be an extremely inexpensive activity. And one of the things sorry.
Yeah, I was asking, wearing a hat, Is that important to shade your eyes?
I don't wear a hat when I go birding, only because one of the most important things about birding is always making sure that your peripheral vision is just as in tune as what's ahead of you, because a lot of the time you're going to just catch the slightest movement in a branch that's to the side of you that you're not paying attention to, and you want to be able to turn there on the snap of a finger and just look and really see what that bird is, because you don't want to miss anything. And wearing a hat, a lot of times that's going to prevent you from seeing like something that's flying above your head or going slightly behind you. And so I don't wear a hat, and then it also sometimes bumps the binoculars or the camera, and it makes it really hard. So I tend not to wear a hat.
This is really great. We're running out of time, and if you ever want to help like organize a local effort for other students or people in the community, and you want to do it through the town, would love working with you, because I think this is the type of activity that a lot of people will really appreciate. Once they get into it, it could probably be very addicting.
No, definitely. I mean, just to have a quick closing remark, I mean, people always think like you have to go somewhere to see birds. You really don't. If you really look in your own backyard and you watch the sky and you watch the birds flying over, you can see well over 100 species in your own backyard. You can find birds anywhere, and that's what's so fun about birding.
That is, great. So now I'm going to take some binoculars and start paying more attention. And this is one of these interviews that really inspired me. So I'm really, before the interview, I thought, it's an interesting topic, but, I could really see what a fascinating activity this is. And I really want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule, out of your summer to join us today. Is there like a website that you would recommend for more information?
There is not a website I would recommend. I would just, you can look on eBird. You can look up ebird.com and type in Westchester, and you can find out all about the birds that are seen in our area. And then I know there's a Save Our Woods Facebook page if you'd like any more information about the committee working to protect the hillside woods.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, Mr. Feiner.
Great.